Silent Resilience in Guatemala. In the summer of 2022, the Association for Trauma Outreach and Prevention, ATOP Meaningful World, embarked on a humanitarian outreach mission to Guatemala.
Hi, I'm Kalayjian, and we are excited with Lorraine Simmons to be at the airport going to Guatemala for our first mission in Guatemala. Many people ask why Guatemala? There's no crisis.
When preparing for the ATOP Meaningful World humanitarian mission to Guatemala, people asked us, why are you going to Guatemala when there's a war in the Ukraine? We were not surprised by this question because we get the same question regarding almost every country we choose to help. Yes, we acknowledge that there is a violent war in the Ukraine, and the general population knows this because we're getting a lot of propaganda in the media. The truth is, there are many active wars at this time. For example, Azerbaijan is currently attacking Armenia, and the general public doesn't know about it because the media isn't promoting it. One of the reasons we chose Guatemala was because they are struggling to meet many of the goals which are part of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are also called SDGs. Guatemalans are hardworking and motivated, so when the psychologists and professors reached out to us to collaborate, our response was a definite yes. Our humanitarian outreach is about understanding how the health of all people will create peaceful nations and help put an end to wars, as the help of all people depends on how individuals heal from their trauma. On the mission, we focused on several sustainable development goals. The first one we focused on was SDG number 3, good health and well-being. We presented workshops and programs that focused on the mind, body, spirit, and Mother Earth connection via the 7-step integrative healing model. We focused on emotional intelligence, mindfulness, meditation, and soul surfing. We taught the importance of emotional regulation, expression of emotions, as well as receiving validation and empathy to heal from trauma. We encouraged the exploration and identification of lessons learned as taught by Viktor Frankl's local therapeutic principles for empowerment and forgiveness. We engaged people in soul surfing exercises to help dislodge negative emotions trapped in the body and breathing techniques to support mindfulness. We also included information regarding self-care and awareness of the way that trauma impacts well-being.
Bravo.
We also discussed having awareness about the genocide against the Mayans, as well as the 5 types of trauma: individual, collective, vicarious, horizontal, and generational. We emphasize that when negative energy is not released from the body, the individual is at risk of physical and mental distress, thus ultimately illness.
Inside the arm, shoulder.
If we have a society of wounded individuals, it spreads like wildfire to families, communities, nations, and then globally. Without individual healing, we will not have peace. SDG number 4, the quality of education. Our focus was a 3-pronged approach. First and foremost, it's healing and education, then research and publications, sharing our lessons learned, and then third is changing antiquated policies that oppress communities in developing countries. For SDG number 5, which is gender equality, we strive to encourage the balance of rights of both men and women.
Our motto, one of them is when one helps another, both become stronger.
Y nuestro lema es cuando uno se apoya al otro, ambos se vuelven más fuertes.
In our work around the world, it is typically the women who are willing to share their emotions and experiences of trauma, and we wish for more men to attend the healing workshops and other educational programs. The men need to learn about EQ, emotional intelligence, because they are typically living in silence, afraid to share their emotions. When there are repressed emotions and unhealed trauma, it causes them to lash out, leading to domestic violence and community violence. In Guatemala, to our initial delight, there were many men in the workshops, and they were expressive and vocal. We thought there was a shift in the women-only dynamic happening, but sadly we were wrong. We started noticing that the women were silent. Many of them were so repressed by the men they were afraid to express themselves. Cases of domestic violence are extremely high in Guatemala, and many times they are undocumented because the women don't report their abuse out of fear. Many of the women are silently resilient. Sustainable Development Goal number 8, decent work and economic growth. The economic situation in Guatemala is dire. Many people must work 3 to 5 jobs just to survive. People who hold master's degrees and teach at the universities don't make enough money to pay their rent or mortgage and must take on several more jobs to supplement. Students cannot afford to go to university, so cannot continue their education beyond high school, and some drop out at a younger age to work. The literacy rate in 2022 was 79.4% for the adult population aged 15 and older, and it is 10% lower for women than men. We presented a workshop at a school called Safe Passage. The school provided education for children who live in an area in Guatemala City called the garbage dump area, because it surrounds Central America's largest landfill, an area of 40 acres. The school offered educational opportunities to parents of the children as well. It's mostly the mothers who attend the classes and support groups because the fathers were either working all day or not interested in learning about emotional intelligence.
And then release all the stress. Respiren así profundo y saquen todo el estrés que tiene otra persona. Una más.
Meaningful World suggested and encouraged the staff of Safe Passage to offer woodworking or automobile mechanics classes and provide a male social worker to be on site with them to help them learn how to manage their anger and stop the domestic violence. SDG number 11 is Sustainable Cities, and SDG number 13 is Climate Action, which addresses Mother Earth and Gaia. Guatemala is experiencing climate chaos and extreme climate crisis. They are a country that is affected by almost all types of natural disasters: earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, tsunamis, landslides, floods, droughts, ground collapse, tropical storms, and extreme temperatures and forest fires. During our short stay, we witnessed mudslides, torrential rains, collapse of 8 bridges, and sinkholes rendering highways and roads impassable, resulting in 3 to 7 hour traffic jams. The urgency that we felt was faced with many people nonchalantly responding, "Oh well, anything could happen in Guatemala." While we were impressed at the silent resilience of the Guatemalan people, we also recognized that this is a learned helplessness, which can be crippling. In the interest of learning more about the ecological health of Guatemala, we met with Javier Esquivel, an ecological engineer in Petén, who, together with Alan Romero, have created an ecologically conscious reforestation project called Azucenas. They have purchased deforested farmland and planted over 10,000 hardwood trees. We were fortunate to have the opportunity to plant several trees ourselves and learned about how to keep the roots free of mold and moisture. Javier and his staff are assisting nature to reclaim the land. Mother Earth is silently resilient. Sustainable Development Goal number 16, Peace, Justice, and Strong Institutions. Guatemala has been victim to human-made violence for decades, starting with colonization, which lasted from 1524 through 1821 AD. Also, there has been what's called the silent genocide against Mayans, which started during the Guatemalan Civil War in 1960. The trauma is so recent that many people who experienced the war firsthand are still alive and holding on to defense mechanisms that they developed to survive. For example, their distrust in the government stemming from the silent genocide was because the government was telling them they were vaccinating the children, but it was actually a ploy to slaughter them. So, during COVID, they refused to be vaccinated, thinking it would lead to another genocide. The younger people in our workshops disclose that the older generations are not talking about the trauma they survived and witnessed, so their history is lost in their silence. They are not releasing their fears, and instead it will be passed on generationally through DNA until someone breaks the chain within the family. Remember, as Dr. Ani says, trauma that is not transformed will be transferred to the next generation. Sustainable Development Goal number 17, Partnership for the Goals. The team made the following suggestions for partnership and sustainability. Join the free Meaningful World Zoom support groups with the goal of creating Spanish-speaking support groups. Join the monthly educational workshops via Zoom. Continue scientific research. Create peer support in each organization and empathy groups at the morgue. Connect troubled youth with reforestation programs. Create and update a mental health and alternative health resource list. Create men's EQ groups through teaching trade professions. Integration of the Mayan traditions. And to organize nature retreats and mediators for support and follow-up. Something that we were questioning. Why couldn't we find groups of indigenous people in Guatemala? Doesn't Guatemala promote itself in celebration of their Mayan culture? Where are they? What are their alternative healing practices? Where are their shamans? Most people couldn't answer our questions. Eventually, we learned that they are hiding in the mountains due to the silent genocide and colonization. They are less than 5% of the population and severely oppressed, so there is a contradiction here. It is puzzling and concerning that on one hand, Guatemalans celebrate their Mayan history, and then on the other hand, they are repressing it. In hopes of understanding the Mayan culture more clearly, we traveled to Petén in the northern section of Guatemala. During our time in Petén, we visited Tikal, a national park with lush green trees and plants, ample clean water, and an area teeming with wildlife. It is also dedicated to the preservation of a large parcel of ancient Mayan ruins. The Mayan metropolis was once home to thousands and thousands of thriving, opulent people. It was rich in soil and wealthy with trees, rivers, and lakes. But just as in our modern-day cities, the trees were cut down and more structures built. The land could no longer sustain itself, so the ample water supplies dried up, forcing the inhabitants to abandon their homes and communities. On our visit, we saw temples, homes, and pyramids in various states and conditions, some being unrecognizable, appearing as densely tree-covered hills and valleys in a forest. Nature has been silently reclaiming itself for thousands of years. After 13 workshops, the team identified the following areas of strength in Guatemala: strong family values and a dedication to religious and spiritual practices, deep identity with the ancient Mayan cultural roots, resilience, commitment to help one another, high levels of education amongst our collaborators, and openness for international collaboration. Our collaborators have a vision to embrace the scientific process and to continue the research process and joint publication. The challenges that we identified were learned helplessness, disconnection from practicing the Mayan healing techniques, high levels of domestic violence, inequality, repression, and violence against women, a patriarchal judicial system, machismo, history of repression of Mayan peoples, and high rates of suicide and high rates of homicide of women. Will the silence be broken? Meaningful World is listening in the silence, waiting to help when someone calls. Please consider donating generously today.